We tend to present an image of creativity as this place of chaos and confusion. Papers scattered atop a desk, Post-its placed everywhere from your bathroom mirror to on top of your milk jug, or if you live in Brooklyn, on your coconut milk. It's assumed that to be creative, you must be unorganized, overwhelmed, and frantic, but that simply isn't true. Some of the most successful people I know have developed a system to keep their creative projects completely organized. If you're starting something big, be it a film, a new book, or a client project, you have a massive amount of information to catalog. And I'm sorry to say, but your brain alone isn't up to the challenge. A tornado of papers and a desktop cluttered with 200 icons will only serve to distract you. You must stay organized. It's the only way to do your best work. This is episode 19 of The Ground Up Show. My guest today is Ryder Carroll, a digital product designer and creator of the Bullet Journal. He's been featured by the New York Times, Fast Company, and Lifehacker, and he's got an amazing TEDx talk called How to Lead an Intentional Life. Ryder, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you here. I got to look at some of the stuff that you do, including the Bullet Journal, and it's pretty damn cool. Do you want to briefly explain what it is?
Sure. I like to define Bullet Journal as a mindfulness practice that's disguised as a productivity system. So it uses basically just a paper notebook to help you keep your mind clear and keep you aware of the things that you need to do. And more importantly, keep you aware of why you're doing those things. So it's a daily routine. It's really flexible and it's really designed to become whatever you need it to be.
Have you always been a fan of analog and actually writing and journaling? It seems like there's almost a resurgence of that today with the Moleskine notebook and Bullet Journal and all these products.
Well, originally I didn't really think about it that way. Just when I grew up, a lot of the digital tools were a lot more rudimentary, so there was no option. So writing was the main form. And then as I got more and more into the digital space, it always seemed like a refuge to me. And for me, it's not like digital versus analog. It's always about what is the right tool for the job. And that's really what I focus on. And I found that when I use my notebook, it's a really excellent way to just completely turn off the flood of data that we're exposed to constantly in a very effective way. I mean, the digital space is wonderful because it exposes you to everything all the time, but there's no real way to process that, at least for me. And that's what the notebook's for. It's like all of a sudden you're offline.
Do you make time every day for it? Is it during meetings or at specific times where you're journaling versus on the computer? Do you take detoxes?
All of the above, I guess. So the way I like to structure my day is I'll bullet journal first thing in the morning. Just to be clear, on a very basic level, bullet journaling is about speed. So I'll wake up in the morning and just kind of put everything that's in my head on paper really quickly. It's not really long form. And then I will review in the morning the things that I've written the day before and things that I have just written, just kind of to get ready for the day. And then throughout the day, my bullet journal will be on my desk or at a meeting or something, and it'll just allow me to quickly capture what's on my mind so it doesn't preoccupy me. The idea is not really to be editing the information at that point. You're just capturing it. So you're constantly offloading. And then at the end of the day, I will review or reflect, as we call it, through all the information that I've caught throughout the day and process it. So during the day, it's just capture. And then at the end of the day and in the morning, it's kind of processing that information and making sure that these things that you've written down add value to your life.
Is it really about organization? Is that one of the most important things you think? Or is it, I guess the intentionality is a combination of organizing and...
It's both of them. It's being able to organize the what, but also to clarify the why. And just to be clear, so the bullet journal is actually a practice that can be used in any notebook. I just was fortunate enough to partner with a company to design like an ideal notebook for bullet journaling. So you don't need it, but it's definitely nice to have.
Sure. I feel like whenever I'm journaling now, it's just chaos, and it's like sporadic thoughts. And also I have a problem with, and I don't know if this is a problem, but mixing personal journaling with work journaling. And sometimes I'll go to a meeting and I'll open up my journal and it's like, well, that was a really intimate and personal thing. Like, I don't want that to be on a table in front of my clients. Do you separate the two of those? Do you journal in that way as well, like the personal journaling? And then
it took me a long time to figure out a way to combine both. Some people will have two different bullet journals, one for home and one for work, and that's fine. Again, a big part of this is figuring out what works for you, but that has to be the result of actually trying things out. It's a very iterative process. Personally, I just like having one thing. Like, I'm a big minimalist, so I don't want to be dragging around many different kinds of books. So for me, it was trying to figure out ways to very quickly collect related data. And so we have this thing called collections in the bullet journal allow me to do that. So the bullet journal allows you to capture things very quickly, but also to organize them and sort them so you can find them again later, which was the big problem with my journals. You know, I had all kinds of journals and notebooks and all these things. And for me, the design challenge for me was, how do I integrate all these things into one system? And a lot of it is just based on concepts that you already know about. So we have this thing called the index. So you will create collections where you, for example, if you're in a client meeting on page 47, that's where all your notes related to that client will be. So your client will never see any of your other notes, and you will always be able to find it because, you know, your index will tell you that collection is on page 47.
Right. It's kind of, you had to think ahead and think about, this is actually really interesting because, so I've done 2 documentaries, one minimalism, the second was design disruptors. So, and I feel like you are the person, and I did see when creating design disruptors, that was the second project, how they overlap, how design and product design specifically, and creating a user journey and an experience. And you're talking about iteration and kind of delving down to what's essential. There's so much that overlap there. And I feel like those 2 worlds are, I guess you had to have those 2 worlds to be able to create something like the bullet journal.
Yeah. I mean, for me, a lot of this came from the fact that when I was really young, I had really bad learning disabilities. And the way that I found that I could cope with them, especially when there was no internet and there were very few resources available, is that I designed my way out of things. You know, I actually figured out a system or figured out something that worked for me. And that's what kind of fascinated me about design. Figuring out how design can actually have a really practical application.
I want to kind of go back and figure out how you got to this point, living in Bushwick, working on Bullet Journal, and being a digital product designer. You're a freelance digital product designer, is that right?
No, until recently, that was what I did full time. That was my occupation. I worked for agencies for the last 15 years. And now I focus on Bullet Journal full time.
Oh, that's amazing, man. Congrats.
Thank you.
So I'm really interested in both of those stories. And I want to talk about, for me, being a freelance filmmaker, it sustained me. I loved it. The work was amazing and it was fulfilling and challenging. And then you get to a point where you want to continue to challenge yourself and grow. And for me, it's creating this podcast and doing feature documentaries and creating original projects. So it sounds like you went on a similar journey there. So I definitely want to cover both of them, because I think for people who are just starting out, to be able to create a sustainable freelance business is a great way to, I mean, first of all, you're going to love it in the beginning if you do it right. And then you will hopefully be able to, I guess what I'm trying to do is help people to be able to create a sustainable business and then figure out at that point what they really want to do with their life and how to challenge and grow in their own way. So, but let's go back to, I guess, where does your story start? We don't have to go all the way back to diapers unless you think it's important. Where do you think your story starts when you start to get into this entrepreneurial drive and design and all that?
I guess I've always liked having projects. Like, even when I was at college, I was constantly working on things that like weren't part of the curriculum. The curriculum was always quite limited. And I was working on other things or working on projects that were loosely related to what the teacher was teaching, but then they'd kind of be excited because the kid like took something that they had put out to the class and completely reinterpreted it. So that worked out for better for worse sometimes. So I don't know. I guess I've always just followed the things that really interest me. And that can be both a blessing and a curse, because a lot of times in life you just have to deal with things that you're not interested in, especially in school. Like, you have to sit through these classes, and it doesn't matter if you like them or not. You have to show up and you have to do that. And once I graduated, there was less of that. I mean, absolutely had jobs that I hated and I couldn't deal with, but they in turn inspired me to then learn more about things that did. So when I first moved to New York, I had a horrible production job working at a publishing company. I mean, it was really soul crushing in many ways. It was a lot of character assassination, and basically I felt that I had no abilities and I had no agency anymore, but it forced me to take a step back and be like, what do you want to do right now? Because originally what I wanted to do was direct music videos.
Oh, really?
That was a big thing.
No way.
But by the time I graduated college, those didn't really exist anymore. That wasn't really
It was the world was changing, and if you weren't personally a DSLR filmmaker and you doing everything yourself, because the budgets have become so small, it's very hard to get into that world. And even now, there's like no money in it, and it's just not a very exciting world to be in.
No, not at all. But what I was getting into, I mean, at the time, this is like 2003, 2004, was online narratives, right? So websites were becoming significantly more artistic and interesting and kind of probing the edge of what interactive narratives could be like. And that was really interesting to me. I would see like these really weird stories online, that people just made themselves, and you click on this. I mean, they were very rudimentary, but still all of a sudden I was like, wow, this is kind of interesting stuff. So I started learning more and more about the web while I was at this job. And then, I started taking night classes, learning how to code and design online. And that's kind of where I fell in love with building digital tools. I mean, at the time it was just basic websites. And then over time I got a little bit exhausted and worn out on doing websites because they weren't as interactive as I liked. So I started designing products. And a lot of times that skill set allowed me to work for really interesting companies, and but I would be working on their thing, and that's okay, and that's great, and it allowed me to learn a lot. And a lot of times when you're uncomfortable, even at work, that's a great learning opportunity. But I would take those things and then also apply them to things that I was interested in. So I'd build like these weird interactive microsites for like authors or whatnot, and I'd do like a lot of the photography myself. So it allowed me to integrate a lot of different skill sets and constantly just keep testing myself to see what would resonate with me. So it was like iterative interest, a search for my interests, I guess you would say, because things change, like I don't want to make music videos anymore. That doesn't interest me at all. There are other things that I want to do. And so I guess it was always just having trust in my curiosity and really trying to cultivate it as much as possible, because I don't know, I feel like the older I get, like that becomes more and more narrow, like the things I become interested in. Like when I was younger, like a lot of things were interesting, and now I've done a lot of those things, and I realize that not everything needs to be your passion. Some things can just be a hobby, or some things could be something you just enjoy at a distance passively. But there are other things where all of a sudden like I want to know more, and that's always what's driven me. Like this I resonate with this. Where can this go?
You brought up a really good point, and it was like you had come to a moment after being at that first job where it just wasn't working out. It wasn't making you happy. And there was a build up to this point where you finally asked yourself the question. It's like, what do I actually want? And I think most people don't ever ask that question. That's something that I learned going around interviewing 30, 40 people about minimalism, and these people who have started practicing it. Most of them went on this journey, although you don't have to be in a shitty job to have this realization. Although I think it helps. It helps you wake up more than anything. But you have to ask the questions, and most people just don't ask them. Most people just continue along on their lives, not actually figuring out what they want. And then I think there's been an evolution for me, is first asking what I want, but then this may sound cheesy, but I kept asking that, and then I kept getting what I wanted, and then I still wasn't like, well, okay, this is not, I don't know if maybe I set the target in the wrong place. Maybe I wasn't going for the right things. But then if I rephrase the question and I asked, what do I want to give, or how can I help? Like if I phrase it in that way, it takes a little bit of the stress away from me. It makes me feel like I'm not just all out for personal gain and personal gratification. And it's great to have your own personal goals. But if you're not taking in, say, a community or trying to build something beyond that, it can be kind of shallow, I think. At least that was my own journey. So you ask this question, then what did you do at that point? Like, did you just quit your job right there, or did you hatch a plan to figure out how to transition?
I want to take a step back. And first of all, I think what you just said is incredibly important, because a lot of people will put a lot of pressure on themselves to really define what is meaningful to them. And that can work sometimes, but I feel like you came to a realization much sooner than I did. But like, what can I do to help is a very critical way of operating too. I mean, both are valid, but I feel like the second one does take a little bit of pressure off you, and also increases the likelihood of you doing something that's impactful. That's kind of where I ended up. That's where my trajectory led. We can get into that in a second. But yeah, so essentially what I did is I started doing freelance work. That's what I did. And then I took on enough freelance work until I could finally support myself. I could eke by. That first job wasn't exactly a windfall to begin with, so it was kind of easy to just...
Yeah, like if you're making like hundreds of thousands of dollars, you don't have to worry about it. But this was like an entry level position.
Yeah. It was the entry level of the entry level. It was like that job that like you learn 3-4 weeks into it, like everybody quits in 6 months.
Right.
So like after 14 months of it, I was ready to go.
Wow, yeah.
And by then I had built up, a couple connections, and it was definitely scrapping by, but at least like when money is really rare, like generally speaking, you start thinking about like, it's a double insult. I hate my job and I'm not making enough money, at least with when I was focusing on freelance work where I was making even less money, like it was fine. It was okay. Like, yeah, it wasn't great. And sure, I wanted, business to pick up and everything. But like, I woke up every day being like, this is a fight worth fighting, and I was very, very fortunate to be able to scrap up enough work. And when I didn't, I cater waitered or I'd augment it. Like, it's like, you just do what you have to do, but it allowed me to do both.
That's a mentality and a shift that certainly occurs in a moment, but every once in a while you backslide, or you have your doubts along the way where you're like, shit, wait a minute, I don't know if I can do this. Like, or I've gotten many job offers over the past like 10 years for people clients who really like what I do and they want to hire me full time. And they can provide benefits. They can provide a lot that I personally, or to a level that I probably couldn't do myself right now. But I've never looked at an offer, and I'm glad I never did. I remember like I almost got a job at The Verge. Like they wanted to offer me, they said, we want to hire you full time. I was thinking the meeting was going to be just about freelance. And I was like, damn, man, that would be really good right now. But like, I just can't. Don't even show me the number. Don't show me like the benefit package, because I know, and it was a good thing that I wasn't at a backsliding moment where I was having doubts. How do you continue to over that period of time, you freelance for, you said 8 years or so? How, over that period of time, I imagine, obviously, eventually things start getting better and you start working with big clients and making good money. But before that happens, how do you face that doubt?
Well, I mean, for me, when I talk about freelancing, like I became a contractor as well. So sometimes I'd work at a place for like 6 months, and that went on for years. And that's great because on the one hand, it offers you security, flexibility. But on the other hand, it also reminds you of why you don't want to be there or why you do want to be there. I think in general, it's just important to keep checking in with yourself, because I think that the idea of always progressing or the need to move forward can be damaging, right? I think that it's more important to just be aware of where you are, because I think a lot of times we just spend so much time with our heads down, racing towards this finish line blindly just to get there and like realize there was no race at all. Like there was no race, like you're setting goals for the point of setting goals. And I don't think setting goals is bad by any stretch, but I feel like setting goals for the sake of setting goals is also not helpful, right? You have to kind of know where do you want to go and why do you want to go and how are you going to get there, kind of take these goals apart and then move towards them. So like even when you're backsliding, like if you feel like you're actually accomplishing things and you can be satisfied with where you're going, I feel like that will give you a lot of confidence and it can be really empowering, you know? I mean, generally backsliding means like, at least for a freelancer, there's no work coming in, or the work that is coming in is stuff that you have to take. You know, you're working for clients who you really rather not, or, I mean, I was fortunate enough never have to have like a morally questionable client, you know, like that happens all the time though, you know?
Yeah, I don't think I have either. I'm trying to think.
But, you know.
Well, you know, what's funny is that I would say once I got into minimalism and simple living and telling that story, and now I'm a director of minimalism, and it's like, can I still do corporate work with Reebok and like clothing brands? And then you start to question, you're like, well, shit, like, I don't know how that would look. But at the same time, I'm like, I think there's certainly a balance there. And for me, that's not morally, wrong to buy Reebok sneakers. I think that there obviously is a problem with people with compulsory consumption and people buying things that they don't need just because they want that dopamine hit of buying a new thing. But I'm not like anti-consumption, like we should all run around wearing loincloths all day. But that is I think another important question to ask is like, does this actually align with my values and my beliefs? It's funny. You reminded me of Jim. I think Jim Carrey said it is like everyone knows money won't buy happiness, but they want to figure it out for themselves. And even though we know these things to be true, and a lot of people know, it's like, yeah, it's not the destination. It is about the journey. It's a lot of times people have to learn for themselves, unfortunately, and it is the learned experiences of rushing towards a finish line. Hopefully it doesn't take you to 65 to realize that, but rushing towards a finish line sometimes is the best way to learn that it actually wasn't about it. And the next time you can actually enjoy the journey a little bit more because you're constantly working on projects and things that have a beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I would argue that the whole finish line concept is flawed. The more commonly accepted idea of like this big purpose, right? I feel that our lives are constantly shifting. We're constantly learning new things. We're evolving every single day. So how can we possibly imagine that the thing that we thought was important 5 years ago still matters now? And if you're still working towards that, chances are you're probably going to be disappointed when you get there because you're not the same person who had that goal. You're not the same person who wanted those things. I don't want the same things I wanted when I was 15. Like, there's no similarity there. I'm sure I still enjoy some of the same things.
Sure. Yeah.
But generally speaking, I feel like it's more important just to kind of be aware of what you're currently doing and making sure that it aligns with what matters to you now as best as possible. Like I do want to say, like, sometimes you need work and you just need to do what you have to do to get by. And unless you're incredibly fortunate, there's very few people I know who haven't had to do that. But at the same time, even when you're in that situation, you can find your opportunity, you know, like, did I want to cater waiter? Like on a day where it's like 110 and I had to wear a penguin suit on a roof deck? Like,
yeah,
absolutely not. There's not one interesting thing about that.
Yeah.
But it allowed me to save enough money to buy a computer. And, you know, and like, there you go. It's like all of a sudden you don't need to be trapped by an unbearable situation. You just need to kind of figure out how it can move you away or what your opportunities are in that situation.
Yeah. And I think to make sure you don't get stuck, because working in a grocery store through high school and college made me want to get out and I'm like, I don't ever want to do this. This is not fulfilling for me. Like when you have a job where your entire day you're daydreaming about doing something else, anything but what that job is, it's a good indicator that you shouldn't continue down that path. I think that transition is certainly a difficult one. What advice would you give to people who are, say, working a job that they don't like, and maybe they haven't found their path yet. Maybe maybe they're into photography and they want to focus on that. Like, I guess, what advice should we give people that are trying to make that transition?
Well, my advice would be start by sitting down and writing down things that you like or things that you love. Just anything. Just free form. Let it all out on paper. And then, if you have hobbies, that's an easy place to begin. I would say if you're stuck, sometimes you will be stuck and you'll just be there because there are no other jobs or there is nothing else. So what can you do for yourself, or what can you do for your community, or what can you do outside of that? Because sometimes, like, as I said, people may not have the ability to change jobs for whatever reason. They're supporting a family or, a sick family member, and they just need that income, and that's where they are for now. But at the same time, what are they doing for themselves? So, like, life doesn't just become the agony of that experience, like, what can that miserable job afford you? Or the time that you have away from that place. It's just cultivating awareness of things that aren't bad. Like, there's a lot of talk about gratitude and or practicing gratitude. And I would say that, like, my biggest realization is that it constantly makes me focus, or it constantly makes me search for things that I like. Because when things get really bad, sometimes it's nearly impossible to see positive things. It's hard to see good things. But if you train yourself, it's like any other muscle. Like, it's a skill. You start finding things that interest you or that you like. And for people who are stuck somewhere, I'd start by trying to name those things. And then once you have a name, then that's a foundation that you can set to start getting involved with those things. Is it working with your community? Is it photography? Okay, so I have very little time. Okay, but you don't have so little time in a week that you can't spend an hour, like, setting up a shoot. Or, is there somebody that you love that you want to spend more time with? Well, why don't you go take some portraits of them? Maybe it's you can figure out a way to spend more time with friends. Like, I feel like if you have sources of joy in your life of any kind, or at least that you're actively pursuing something that you believe in, that it will influence the rest of your situation as well. Maybe your job sucks, but, like, your hobby keeps you content. Doesn't need to make you happy. I mean, that's a whole different conversation. I think happiness is a little bit overrated or a little bit of a distraction, but at least you feel like your days are worthwhile, in some way. You need to find something there. I feel like when people get stuck, that's the first thing to go. It's like, I'm just wasting my time. And, like, that idea becomes, like, pervasive.
Yeah.
Like, everything's a waste. Everything's a waste because so much of my day is gone. And that's an easy trap to fall into. I have myself as a freelancer, it's like, I have, like, one gig that's not great and it's hardly paying the thing, but, like, there's nothing else coming in. What do I do? It's like, well, start finding things, it's up to you. Like, that's the one thing you can do. That's the one thing in life you have control over, is how you react to your situation. And so, like, I would advise people to start training how to react.
You said the writing is important, to write down your kind of what you want, what your goals are, and at least the direction that you want to head.
I mean, anything that comes to mind, like, set your intention. Like, sit down and it's like, okay, I'm stuck, I'm miserable, I'm like, whatever. It's like, okay, so write down the things that you're not miserable about. What are things that interest you? What not necessarily make you happy, but that's okay too. And the reason that I like doing that personally is I feel that we live in an age where we're constantly overwhelmed. Even if you're bored, you're overwhelmed, especially when you're bored. It's like Instagram, Facebook, just constant influx of information and data and all these things. And a lot of times I kind of like, it anesthetizes you, you don't have to think anymore. And I think that your mind is just so cluttered with thoughts, some that have been processed, most of which have not. And personally, I found when I write things down, I can see my thoughts for the first time. They're not gone, like, our minds are filled with so many thoughts that are moving. The thoughts aren't stagnant, they're racing. And for some of us, racing thoughts is a real problem. But I feel like all of us are guilty of that at some time. And how do you stop? How do you capture a thought? Name it. Put it on paper. It's very simple. Like, all of a sudden you see it.
Becomes real.
It becomes real. It's out of your head, and now you can work with it.
Yeah.
That's why I like paper.
That's well, I actually did that with minimalism. Was I wrote about 5 or 6 months before that project started, before Josh emailed me and said, "Hey, I've got an idea for a project. I want to make a feature-length documentary." I wrote down a bucket list, and it was kind of cliche, but it was one of the top things was make a documentary about something I care about. And it's like, you have to put it down. And I honestly don't believe in the law of attraction or anything like that. I do think that what you focus on will become a reality if you continue to focus on it. And that, for me, writing that down, who knows if it would have happened if I didn't. Writing down, I think I would argue equally important is reading. And I don't think people read enough, because in my early days, I would catalog and I would write down what I read, and to kind of keep a running list. And it was 100, 200 books over that couple years where I was just getting started out, and I read like every entrepreneurial book, every Seth Godin book, every Malcolm Gladwell book. I don't think people read enough now, and I think that will help to guide your thoughts and help to guide what you yourself write down, because there is inspiration and guidance, and you need people that have been through it before. In my way, like in a lot of ways, books were my mentor, and I had a couple mentors over the years. Some were good, some ended up actually being bad in hindsight, but you read, say, a good personal finance book, and then it's the best guidance you can have, because there's a lot of myths and there's a lot of garbage that's floating out there and a lot of bad ideas. And you have to find the right people, the right books, and the right mentors to be able to push you in the right direction.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think reading is incredibly important. The reason that I like the list, just to get back that also, is because it's a foundation, and like acting on those things will expose you to new elements. So for example, with any pursuit or any hobby, you start to learn, and you learn by reading, by watching videos, by whatever method works for you. Information is only as valuable as your ability to kind of understand it. Right. So, I think that books are incredibly important. And again, with the writing things down, one thing that I like about your story a lot is not only did you have this idea, but by writing something out, you actually kind of define it. It's not just like a word. It's like the first time you actually define a thought. Like, what is it exactly that you want? And that exercise can help a lot. And once you kind of know what that is right now, then it's time to begin. And how you begin is such an exhilarating process. And for me, the first thing I do is start to learn. Like, I try to learn as much as I possibly can, but I have to know what I'm going to learn about, because I also am guilty of sometimes being interested in a couple things. And it's like the classic YouTube thing. We start like learning about something you're interested in. The next thing you know, you're learning how to build like mud tiles for like some, like, you're like, wait a second. No, yeah. It's like, that interest is being watered down. So it's important for me to have my intention. Like, what do you want to learn about, and why are you reading this book, and why are you watching this video, or why are you doing these things? And is this actually helping you move forward? It's not necessarily about understanding it just yet, but like the mud tiles have nothing to do with understanding like a way to, color grade some video, like 0%. It's just like a cool video or a book. Yeah.
I think that like so YouTube and watching YouTube videos or scrolling through your Instagram, the distractions that we get caught up in, I don't think it's anything that's new. I think when I was in high school, it was just watching TV. And then even before that, it was probably radio or newspapers. People find a way to distract themselves, to pacify themselves, because doing the work, or at least getting started with the work, it just seems overwhelming. It seems like you don't know where to start. You think you're too dumb, or you're not actually gonna, or you're afraid that that what you're gonna make is gonna be shit. You're afraid that there's just so much that's pushing you away from it. But really, once you get started with it, once you start to clear away these distractions, within like 45 minutes to an hour into a project that I'm working on, those things kind of fall away, and then you just get lost in the work, and then you're just doing the work. And that's really what I enjoy, is when I'm in the middle of the work, and I do go on. So say if I'm working on a project right now. I know IBM was a client that you had in the past. I'm doing it's actually about their design program. It's a 25-minute film about IBM's design transformation, a company that has over 100-year history, and in the 1950s, they were kind of the design leaders in the corporate design world. And they had some of the most amazing designers that were leading the program. And then it kind of fell by the wayside, and they had, the last few decades not focusing on design at all. And so working on this project, there's some challenges there. It's like kind of a corporate film, and it's like you have to make it interesting, engaging, and there's a lot of challenges that go with that. And making any project that's over 10 minutes long can be a challenge. But if I'm looking at that project, I'm like, I think in the beginning, I'm a little bit overwhelmed right before it starts. I'm like, all right, how the hell am I going to tell the story? How am I going to put this together? But then once you start working, you're like, all right, this is fun. This is cool. You're doing interviews. You're learning about the story, and there's some excitement to it. And then after I shoot all that footage, then I kind of come back to it like, well, shit, all right, what am I going to do with this stuff? How do I put it all together? And then after that, you start to work again, and that starts to fall away. And it kind of comes and goes. And I think that's just what challenges are. And that's what any big project entails, is facing these challenges and overcoming the challenges. But you just have to keep digging no matter what, no matter how hard it gets in the middle of it, you have to keep going. With client projects, it's easier because you're getting paid and you're like, if I don't deliver on this, then I'm going to be in trouble. But if it's a personal project, it kind of comes either from within, or what I found is having partners on a project. That tends to push me and drive me to actually finish what I started. I'm not sure how that whole diatribe started, but I think, but where it ended is finding partners. Is that something that you found to be pretty valuable?
I would say that that's absolutely critical. I mean, two things I want to talk about here. One is I feel like you don't need to finish every project. Like I feel you mentioned reading a lot, and for me, what I spend a lot of time doing is learning right now in general as I build this community of mine. Like I want to make sure that the information that I believe in is vetted, and that I'm getting a broad spectrum of different information. And I read a lot of books where like halfway through I'm like, this is a distraction, this book. It actually, all of a sudden, like this information is not valuable, or it's going down a path that isn't right. And the same thing is true for projects. And it's a super hard to define balance, because Bullet Journal is not my first startup. I think it's my third or my fourth, and I don't even know if I would define it as a startup. It kind of became its own thing, but I have seen things through to the bitter end for no reason, and the sense of gratification that you get at the end of that is not equal to the effort you put into it. And I feel that that's kind of what we talked about earlier about this finish line thing. It's like, why are you doing this exactly? Like, do you believe in this project? And with one of them, I spent 2 years on. I didn't. Like, I loved the work. I loved building it, but the product itself didn't have meaning to me. Like, I liked building the company. I like building the software that ran it, but like the end product, like I didn't want to run that company.
This is like, I'm sure you've read The Dip, Seth Godin.
Yeah.
That's if you guys are in this position or want to understand why quitting is actually a good thing, that's a really good primer. Very short book on it's basically that excitement that you have. You're kind of going up this hill. Everything is great. Everything is fun. You're building this brand. You get to work on fun, interesting problems. And then inevitably every project reaches a point where you kind of fall into this dip where it feels like you're stuck. You're trapped in this hole. You don't know why you're doing it. All this doubt comes rushing in. Some projects should stop right there. But some, and maybe it's a small percentage, you should keep pushing through those tough times and actually get to the outcome.
Yeah. And to your point before, like, I feel like one of those like differentiating factors that can make things more clear is like, what value will this project add to others? Like, can it help other people? Because a lot of times, like, when you don't want to do it anymore, the best way to get motivated is remembering that it's not about you. And I've found that to help me move forward in some of the most difficult projects that I've had. It's like I can't do this anymore. Like, I just can't show up anymore. And it's like, well, it doesn't matter what you want, in this case. Like, do you believe in what it's going to do for other people? And if the answer is yes, that's really helpful. It's not always that clear, and obviously there's no absolutes here, but that's helped me in the past. And So that's definitely, I feel that it's a hard line to define. At what point do you stop? But I feel like it's very important to be honest with yourself. Like, what's a bad day and what's a bad idea?
What was that trajectory for you from what do I want to what can I give?
One thing that I found was interesting when I was younger, I volunteered a lot for, different organizations, and I always had like this profound sense of satisfaction, honestly, even if what I was doing wasn't necessarily something I liked doing. At the end of the day, it wasn't about me, and I liked that. I never really found all that many opportunities to continue doing that. And one thing that was really interesting about working with digital products is that you can affect people at scale. It's like some dude sitting alone in his apartment in Brooklyn can create this thing that can help untold amounts of people, as opposed to showing up and volunteering in a shelter, which is in no way less, but I liked the fact that I could put the same amount of time into something and it could affect much more people. So I started volunteering for some non-for-profits in the digital space, building apps and different things. I'm like, wow, this is kind of interesting. This is taking my day job and applying, these powers for good. And so I kind of kept on looking for opportunities and volunteering when I had the time to do these things, or, with the agencies that I work for. Sometimes they would have programs that would teach people things, or, just do things for the benefit of mankind. Or when you're super lucky, have a project that is actually entirely dedicated to doing something valuable. Or, and then I've always kind of been curious about how can I do more of that. And then I wrapped up one project that was a very, very long project, one that was very exhausting, both emotionally and creatively. I just felt that I had very little say in this thing, and I put a lot of work into it. It was like a team that was too small. I'm sure you've run into that, where you're like, all right, I guess I'll do everything.
Yeah, I still do that a lot.
Yeah. And that's fine when it's yours. When it's somebody else's, it's you really have to believe in it. And if you don't, your batteries get tapped pretty quick. So I did this for a while, and I was grateful for the opportunity. But I left the job wrapped up. Like, I'd finished my time. It was a contract, and I didn't want to renew the contract. And then my next contract, I was fortunate enough at the time to have gained enough clientele. So I had the next thing lined up, and it was like 2 or 3 weeks away. And I just came home. I was traveling for this job, and I was like, I need to build something I believe in. I want to share something that could help just somebody, somewhere, something. So I kind of wanted to use, like, I had learned how to code basically. I'm not a great developer. And I was like, okay, I'm going to build a website. I'm going to build a website that's going to teach people something. Like, what am I going to teach them? Like, what can I provide for people that will add value of some kind? And I'm definitely not the best designer in the world. I'm certainly not the best developer in the world. And a lot of this was inspired by the amazing amounts of information that people give away online for free. Like, these people who are the most talented people in the world, or thought leaders, they just share this information. And I was always so grateful for that. So I felt like this was my opportunity to kind of like, why don't you do something like that? Stop taking, like, give something back somehow. But then the challenge is like, what is unique to me that I can share? And that took a while. That took a while to think about. And then I remembered, like, a couple of years previously, a friend of mine was planning her wedding. I worked with her, and she was struggling with the organization of this stuff. Like, as you had mentioned at the beginning, like, paper covered her desk at work. And every time there's a phone call, the hand is like rummaging through this pile of paper, notebooks, color swatches, like all over the place. And I walked by, I'm like, do you want me to show you how to use, like, how I use my notebook? And I don't know why I said it. Like, it never assumed that other people would be interested in this. It's the way I organized my mind. And you don't necessarily want to share how you organize your mind with other people, or expose your mind to other people. That's even more,
there's a vulnerability to it.
Yeah, it's very vulnerable. And like, with my history of, like learning disability, like you are otherized very quickly. Like, oh, you know, you're the dumb kid in class, you're the one in the back. So opening up about how my mind works was definitely something I felt very uncomfortable about, but she had gotten me that job. And I've always been looking for an opportunity to kind of see if I could provide some value. And I was like, taking her out for dinner's fine, but like, what can I do that actually has impact, you know? I was like, maybe this. It kind of just came out of nowhere. So I sat down with her, and so over the course of an hour, I kind of just explained to her how I use my notebook. And this is like way before Bullet Journal was a thing, right? So I had no vocabulary for it. It was very hard for me to define how I did this and how the different parts related to each other and all these things. And I finally finished, and I looked up, and she was sitting there with like her mouth hanging open, like, oh no, she thinks I'm completely nuts, you know? And she sat there for a second just staring at me. And the first thing she said is, you have to share this with people. And at the time I was like, oh, you know, that's nice of you to say, you know, that kind of thing. You never accept compliments from your friends when you should. But I was sitting there, and all of a sudden I remember that. I'm like, yeah, well, maybe I should. And I had shared pieces of the Bullet Journal with people along the way, and they always responded really well. And one thing I noticed is, like, as I started thinking about it, it's like, I have never worked somewhere where I've not seen a notebook. And I'm a digital native. Well, sort of, I guess. I live in a digital native space, and I occupied that space for a very long time. But like developers, designers, project managers, like you go into any like digital shop of any kind, agency, and people just have notebooks. I was like, well, maybe I could share how I use my notebook. Like, I know that there's one person in the world that finds it valuable, and maybe I could share that with other people. And so that's what I did. I took the time between these two contracts to create what I like to call a personal sprint. So one thing we talked about is like, how do you move forward? I like to time box projects, personal projects, because I think it's very important to complete things. Psychologically, I think it's really important to complete things, especially if you're in the digital space, because nothing's ever done really, you know, like for websites, like there's always an update, there's always a fix, there's always something. And that can be really detrimental to your sense of momentum. Like if there's no sense of momentum, you just constantly feel like you're stagnant. So anyway, at 2 weeks, I'm going to take this notebook thing that I do, and I'm going to formalize it. I'm going to come up with language and vocabulary and try to make it as easy to explain and like reduce it to the absolute minimum. You know, like I've been developing this thing for decades, and I mean, there's a lot of things that didn't work. So I'm like, okay, what are the things that are most effective? What do I use all the time? What have I been using for, you know, years now? And like, here are these things. So I started to name them, and, you know, actually starting to build like a product out of paper and methodologies. So it was really interesting. I was taking all these concepts and a lot of the language that I had gained from my time as a designer, as a digital product developer, and poured it into an analog space. So it's kind of like full circle, because like the digital took it from the analog. And anyway, so a lot of these concepts, and I integrated it into bulletjournal.com. And then I shot a tutorial video to teach people how to do it, because I'm also very well aware of user patterns online. And, you know, a lot of people don't read. So you know, myself included, if there's something that I just want to quickly scan, like I need bait of some kind, you know, and when the bait resonates, then I'll read. And so I created this video just to give people a super basic overview. And I realized I could teach the system, the skeleton of the system in 4 minutes. And that was a really great challenge for me. So like it went from this things like, oh, just make a teaser, to all of a sudden it's like, wow, I can actually reduce this to something that small. And I put it online, and that was like, you know, I watched the first 100 people show up to the website, and I was like, goal accomplished. Maybe one of those people will not have to deal with some of the pain and frustration I had to go through. You know, it's kind of the cliff notes for my mind. That's kind of how I saw it. And, yeah, it kind of became a thing from there.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about that then. How does it go from one friend viewing it to 100 people viewing it to now how many people use the Bullet Journal? And
that's hard to gauge.
Hard to say, yeah.
I would say that, so a year later, and we can get into this, I created a new video, just an updated video, and I got better at doing it, and I added some stuff to it. But that video has over 5 million views on YouTube.
Damn.
Yeah.
How long did it take for that video to take off?
The second video, not that long at all. The first video, which also has a considerable amount of views, fairly quickly. It was, I mean, the whole thing is very surreal. I'll start off by saying that. So everything that comes after that it's still kind of all of fog, you know. This is happening very quickly and very intensely, and I'm doing my best to keep up. So
yeah.
I mean, the first thing I did is I sent out the video to a bunch of personal development blogs, you know, like Lifehacker and lifehack.org, and anybody whose website I had gone to kind of learn, you know. It's like, you taught me here, maybe this will help your community. And then one picked it up, and then another one picked it up, and then, you know, it started gaining steam from there. It's just the way you see viral things happening, and I'm just sitting there like,
like, holy shit,
yeah.
That's gotta be so exciting.
It is, but it's strange because the reaction is both, you're like, wow, and you're like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
You know, like, now it's out there.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
now all
yeah.
of a sudden it's like, now 100,000 people are looking at the way you think.
Yeah, I know the feeling. Yeah.
You know, all of a sudden it becomes a thing, and you as the scale increases, you're just like, you go from excitement to trepidation, I guess. You know, like I don't know. I've always been a kind of like behind the curtain sort of person, and then people start to learn about you as well. And I realized it's like, oh no, it's about this thing. It's about the Bullet Journal. It's not about me. And then all of a sudden people are asking you things, and I didn't expect that, you know. So it's interesting, like, where do you end and the Bullet Journal begins? And especially when, for me, the Bullet Journal is very much about the user. It's not about me, you know.
Right.
So it's been just interesting to see how that evolves, and it evolved very quickly. So yeah, I first thing is to try to find people who you think will find value in this content that you're creating, you know. And I was lucky enough that the people saw value in it, and then they shared it, and then those people shared it, and that kind of just kept on exploding, I guess is the only word I can really think about.
I think a lot of people look at stuff like that and would see like, oh, it happened overnight, but it's like, this is years and years of hard work and figuring out what's working and what's not. And it's not like you just set out from the beginning. I really like the story because it's not like you set out in the beginning. You're like, I want to make a successful product, because that's what a lot of people do, I think. And like, I understand the allure of that. I understand why somebody might want to create a product that goes viral, the next Flappy Bird, and then they can make millions of dollars and then retire and be happy forever. But that's not how this story started. And I don't think that's how most meaningful projects start, because I don't think that creates a longevity to continue even when you are in that dip and times are tough. So where do you go from now in terms of the Bullet Journal, and how do you see this evolving from here? How long ago was it that you started getting picked up and took off?
Well, I launched it in 2013, I believe. Yeah. I took off in 2013, and I've been fortunate enough that every year it's gained more and more steam and popularity. I mean, it's kind of hit a critical mass now, and especially when I started doing a lot more work on like social channels. You know, at first I didn't have a Facebook page. I didn't even have an email registration. Again, it was like a personal sprint. Build this website, come up with the language. And it was very limited in scope, and it allowed me to just get it out. You know, like I never imagined, like if I had known how many people were going to see it, I don't know if I would have done it.
Really?
You know what I mean? It was just like daunting, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
it would have been, much more challenging to approach that. And it probably wouldn't have been as good as of an outcome.
I totally agree, because I would have probably belabored every single detail. Like, I have to get it better. I have to get better sound. I have to get better this and a little bit of a different topic, but you become the victim of perfection. And I think perfectionism is like a hugely damaging concept, one that I fall victim to all the time. Like, what I love about software development, software design, is the idea of agile, right? You just like, you make things and then you improve them, and you improve them over time because you can. So I took a lot of that into heart when I did this. Just like, get it out. You have 2 weeks, do it. And I did. And it was great. It was done. You know, like I launched them, like, great, I'm finished, moved on to the next thing. But what happened after that was when I realized that it could really impact people's lives. You know, for me, I had lost all distance from this thing. You know, like I've been using it for years and years and years. And for me, this is just the way I thought at this time. This is just the way I operated. And I forget who said this, but I love the quote. It's like, be sure to teach others as soon as you learn something, because soon you'll forget what it was like not knowing. You know, so it was, and this was a perfect example of this. I have no idea what it's not like to bullet journal. And when I realized that it could impact people's lives, like then I really became interested in this. At first it was like, maybe this will help some people. And then when it did, things changed. You know, it was a hypothesis. And then that hypothesis was proven over and over and over again. And for people whose lives were fundamentally different from my own, like I created this foundation that mapped onto people who had needs that I didn't. And it helped them. And like, how can I not continue to invest in that? You know, like that's the opportunity. Like that was what I was looking for. How can I create value for other people in a meaningful way? And here it was, and it was completely unexpected. So after I launched the first version, I sat back because I'm like, I kind of did what I wanted to do. And like, I don't know what the next step is. And so I sat back and like literally for a year, just thought about that. And in that time, I saw all these communities kind of spring up, different kinds of communities too, more focused communities, ones that either I had no experience in or wasn't involved with, talking about how they use this foundation and map their own lives onto it. And they started developing different methods inside the bullet journal, because it's modular. You know, you can take out pieces and you can put in pieces, which is one of the reasons why I think it's become so effective, because it becomes whatever you need it to be. And what it needed to be for these people was fascinating and incredibly helpful and interesting and well thought out. And there's just so much ingenuity in this community, but it was getting lost because it's like some pocket somewhere on some social network. And so my idea was like, okay, why don't we just start focusing on the community? And that's the next thing I want to do. Like, how do I become a curator of these ideas to inspire others? Because like that community is small, and though they benefit from it, so many more could. So if they're willing to share, then that's something that I want to facilitate. So a year later, I launched a Kickstarter to, frankly, just to gauge interest if people wanted to have a new website. Because I taught, you know, like the website, bulletjournal.com, the first one taught you everything you needed to know to get started technically. Much more about the productivity system rather than the mindfulness stuff. I wasn't ready to talk about that yet. So I launched the Kickstarter to see if people were going to invest in this idea. Because if they didn't care, then I'm not going to spend my time doing it. You know, like there is already a very helpful resource that's available for free. Do they want to pay for something? You know, it's like, you have it for free. Do you want more of this? And that's important. You know, I don't want to spend my time with something that people won't find value in. And so I launched this Kickstarter. And just kind of a side note, in the Kickstarter, I also took that as an opportunity to create a backer reward. And that backer reward was the custom designed bullet journal notebook. So again, you know, you can use any notebook you want, but I loved the notebook I was using, and I reached out to the guys who made the notebook. I'm like, hey, do you want to do a limited edition of this notebook that's specifically designed for bullet journaling? It just has a whole bunch of little details that allow the system to be even faster. And I said, sure, that'd be great. So I launched the Kickstarter, and I met my goal in like 8 hours, or something like that.
Wow.
It was like, it's kind of flipped my toupee, you know. I was like, okay, I can give it 30 days, cool. You know, and all of a sudden, bam, they're like, yes, the answer is a resounding yes. And then the next thing that happened was like, people started getting very grumpy about the fact that the notebook sold out. They're like, why is it a limited edition? Like, I want that notebook.
How many of them were there?
999.
Wow. So
So they sold out very shortly after that. And then I went back to this company that I work with, Leuchtturm. And I was like, hey, I think there's a real need for this product. You know, I totally underestimated how much value people would find in this notebook, because, you know, you can use any notebook you want. I loved using it, you know, but again, I didn't want to assume that other people found it interesting. So that Kickstarter, allowed me to build the new site, which has a lot of new content, but mostly community-driven content. People who've developed really interesting ideas or very interesting thoughts, or also people that are not entirely in the community, people that are in adjacent communities, just to kind of expand your perceptions. Again, it's all about learning, and I want to share what I've found to be helpful, and I want to share what other people have found to be helpful. And on top of that, it also allowed me to start the business of Bullet Journal with the notebook. So that's kind of where the company of bullet journaling came together, came from this idea to actually becoming more of a company.
It's amazing to be able to find something like we were talking about earlier, where you both truly enjoy and are passionate about the work, and it also helps and benefits people's lives. I don't think there's anything better than that.
No.
So you have a TED Talk called How to Lead an Intentional Life.
No.
When did your path in terms of intentional living start? When did you start to, because there's certainly been since 2008, 2009 is when a lot of the blogs started to come up, Zen Habits, the minimalists, and lots of people writing about minimalism and simple living. What was your path like in terms of leading an intentional life?
A long one, I would say. I mean, so my learning disability was ADD, and like a big part of ADD is just like overwhelm all the time. So for me, intentionality started very early on, and for me it was like mental intentionality. It's like, what are you going to focus on? And I found very quickly that what would help me is to design my space, the spaces around me, and the less there was, the easier it was for me. It wasn't natural, but that bit of discipline, like when the desk was clear, or the room was clear, or the things were in order, like it made it easier because I wouldn't have to think about doing that. Like when you're easily distracted, or you focus on many things at the same time, like any action that can be taken can be a distraction. It's like, I'll clean up my desk and then I'll do my thing, or like I'll do my homework after I do this. So intentionality at a very early age was an incredible challenge. And as I got older and older, it just always came back to focus. How can I help myself focus? And a big part of intentionality for me, or living intentionally, is focus is part of it, but also meaning is much more helpful. Like why do you want to do something? And then it's much easier to focus. Like if you focus on something you don't care about, chances are it's going to be really hard. And I found that to be the case in school a lot. And, I think education is incredibly important, but at the same time, a lot of times we're subjected to things that add no value to our lives, and we have to focus on it. And it's very counterintuitive for me. And like that spilled out into my space. And then something also kind of wonderfully traumatic happened to me as well. When I first moved to New York, my apartment flooded. Wow. Yeah, so I shared in a basement apartment. I was in the ground floor. I was in the basement, more or less. It was a finished basement. And at the time, I moved to New York to actually start like this apprenticeship with like my dream company, like led by the guy who shall remain nameless, but were a huge inspiration to me. And I showed up, and somehow they had forgotten to tell, like I moved everything I had to New York, and I showed up for my first day of work, and they're like, did nobody get in touch with you? Like, yeah, we downsized and blah, blah, blah. So yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah. It was one of those. And I was like, wow, I just moved into this apartment. Like I'm here now. So I was just like another unemployed art student in New York, like in 2002, which was a really, really bad time. They had downsized because of that time. So anyway, I spent months just like going to places. Like all I had was my graphic design portfolio. Like I wasn't I wasn't into web stuff yet. That's what that other terrible job helped me to do, and
to at least get into it.
Yeah, that was the inspiration for that. So anyway, all I had really was physical goods, right? Like you actually had a portfolio. I had to bring in my artwork and show even my graphic design stuff. I had done some graphic novels and album covers and posters and book jackets and, things that either I had written or had done for friends. And that was the only thing that I had to set me apart. And so it snowed very heavily. And the day before, and I woke up. I think it was like a futon mattress. Like I didn't have any money for furniture. And I woke up and I literally saw my portfolio floating by my bed. I was like, because you like wake up, it's like this weird sound, and I'm like, what's that movement? And your eyes are all unfocused. And I'm like, wow. Like I didn't even know. Like I thought I was still dreaming, and and it's funny. My first thought was like, well, at least I have it backed up on my computer, And then I look back and I see like my computer flickering in the back as it was sitting on the floor. Yeah. So in that moment, I lost most things. So over the night, somehow the snow had just melted directly through the foundation and was like perfectly captured by the floor in my part of the apartment. And so I like lost almost everything I had.
It's devastating. It's not only the stuff but the work and what went into that work.
Oh yeah. I mean, getting a lot of that stuff printed was an ordeal in itself. Like if the printers on campus, the nice ones, were broken, I had to like go to Kinko's and figure out how to get these high-end prints, from printers that aren't designed to do that kind of stuff. And so it was in some ways very devastating, and in some ways very liberating, because I had to move out instantly. Landlord wasn't going to do anything about it. So I had very few things, and I kind of liked that. Losing it was hard, but it wasn't that hard, and I was okay.
And you understand that it's not the end of the world.
No,
you lose everything you had, but like, as long as you're okay and you're safe. Although if I lost all my work, dude, that would be devastating. It would take me a bit to get over that, to be honest.
Well, that's kind of where it pulls into focus what actually matters. It's like, I would have given all my stuff 5 times over if I could have saved that work, because like you're unemployed. This is your ticket, is your meal ticket. And you show up with literally warped books and like, some with like molding. Cause like I tried to save it, and then like it ended up being even worse to bring it in. They're like, who's this guy? Showing up with like a whole bunch of messed up work.
It's all like,
but it worked out. I think we can talk at length about materialism, but I feel like one thing that's underestimated is tools. Like I value my tools. There's, I took this, we have time for a little story.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've always been interested in like learning more about making furniture. I built some of it completely randomly on my own. I have like 0 skills or experience, but I just love the idea of like fashioning it. So I took this.
I bought that right there. See behind you? That coffee table?
You built that?
Yeah, I built that. You like it?
Yeah, it's
nice. I mean, I didn't like weld the steel. I just bought some steel legs, but that's probably the only thing I've built in the past 5 years, and it was a lot of fun. Like very rarely today do people actually create stuff with their hands.
That's exactly why I love this stuff. Yeah. Like in school, I did a lot of sculpture, and I got a lot of satisfaction out of that. I just really like working with my hands. So anyway, I took this Japanese joinery class the other day. It was just like a workshop to walk through it, and the guy had this tool. He was, I forget what it's called, but basically it has like a blade on the front, and you use it to smooth out wood. And he took this blade out. I don't know. It's like 5-6 inches long, and had a handle on it. And then he took another tool out. It had the same handle, and then it was like a 1-inch, blade on it. So this is like steel, just 5-6 inches of steel. He's like, can anybody tell me the difference between these two tools? And they just both, and I assumed that it was for a different purpose. And everybody like gave their guess on what the difference was between the application of these two tools. And he's like, nothing. And he raised the smaller blade up. He's like, this was this long. This is the one I started with. So for 40 years, he'd used this tool, just sharpening it and taking care of it. And it was exactly as effective as it was back in the beginning. And I don't know, I just love that metaphor. It's like, yeah, I mean, I'm sure if he lost it, it wouldn't be a big deal. But the fact that he also took care of it, and that he like had become a master in the meantime, and like had that tool that he still used to remind him, I really love that. And, unfortunately in the digital age, there are very few tools that have that kind of longevity. The cameras we're shooting this with are going to be completely outmoded in 2-3 years. These microphones, these things. But that being said, I think there's something to be said for to respect your tools. And yeah, I guess some objects as well. Generally speaking, I try to find things that will last a long time, but if they're gone, it's like, as long as I'm okay, it's all right. Like there are other things there's more experience. I don't know.
Yeah, I tend to do that too. I do the buy it once philosophy. The only problem I have with it is that I will buy some nice things and things that are usually more expensive because they're higher quality. And I'm like, I'll buy this once. I'll buy this nice wool hat. I'll spend $80 on it. And then I lose it. And I do that with sunglasses, and then I lose my sunglasses or they get scratched. And then I'm like, damn it, this is why we can't have nice things. But I think that the intentionality behind that is what's important. And just because I'm forgetful doesn't mean it's not a good philosophy. But it's okay. But then it's not the end of the world. It's like, all right, well, since I don't have 10 hats, I can actually, make that investment in something nice, and if I lose it, then I can get a new one.
Yeah, never invest in umbrellas, especially if you live in New York.
Dude, umbrellas are a tough one. I actually did invest in a good umbrella. I think what's good for me is that, like, working from home or from the co-working space close by, I often, if it's raining out, maybe I'll just stay at home, work from home. I don't even have to go outside. But yeah, dude, the thing is, when you get those cheap umbrellas, they just get destroyed so easily that you can only get one use out of them, like the $5 umbrellas.
Single serving umbrellas.
I have one now that's like, that I probably, I don't know, spent like $40 on. It's like a nicer umbrella. And it's served me well for the past year and a half. It hasn't broken yet, but have you had bad experiences with good umbrellas?
I feel like it's the object that I lose the most, but I also feel a large part of that is where we live. I feel like it's the one thing that people just feel free to take.
That's actually so true.
If it's your umbrella or not. In New York, they're like, it's raining, I'm just going to take this umbrella. And I've seen people do it all the time. And you're like, I know that's not your umbrella because that's my umbrella.
No shit, really?
Yeah,
like right at a bar, like they just grab it?
Yeah, I just feel like it's an unspoken thing that not everybody's on board with.
Yeah, that's true. It's like, come on, it's an umbrella.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
chances
really
are you spend $3 on it because you lost your last one or somebody stole it.
That's great. On that note, you want to do quick questions?
Sure.
This is a segment I call Quick Questions. It's the only segment I have on this show at this point. It's quick questions, not exactly quick answers, but you can answer them in whatever manner you decide. But it's just a way for me to ask a little bit more pointed questions as opposed to the conversational tone we've been having. So you've done a lot of traveling, is that right? You're into traveling, as we were talking before the show. What's the one place that you keep going back to?
I actually try to go to new places as much as possible. I'm originally from Vienna, Austria, so fortunately I get to go back there quite a bit.
What one skill should people learn today that will come in handy in the future, say 5-10 years?
To write.
And how so? Like, what about writing?
I think that whether you use writing professionally, well, I think everybody uses writing professionally in one form or another. I think the practice of clarifying your thought can apply to every single thing in your life. I think that's an important one. Even if you're not a writer or if you're not good with words, just like the exercise of getting your thoughts out on screen, paper, whatever it is, like I found that that's added a tremendous amount of value to my life, and also is probably one of the best avenues for you to learn more about yourself. Like, people always suspect that, I can't speak for all authors and all writers, but in my personal experience as somebody who writes a fair amount of content, is that I'll come in with an idea, or I'll come in with a notion and leave with an idea. Like I actually really start to understand what it is that I have this concept about, and then like that process allows me to actually believe in that idea or not. Like maybe I'm like, I had this notion or this concept and it didn't work out, or on the other hand, it's like, bam, now I know exactly what I want to say, and that's kind of a really wonderful transition.
You talk a lot about writing. It's probably not going to be an important answer, but I'm curious, what kind of pen do you use?
My usual answer is whatever's there. It's like cameras, like the best camera is the one you have on you. But I find myself using a fine liner a lot more for bullet journaling, and there's a very specific reason for that. It slows me down. Like when I write slower with this. I don't know why, but I actually have 5 or 6 very different types of handwriting. I always have. It's really interesting. And
it's like split personalities in there somewhere.
I don't know. I think a lot of it just has to do with the quality of like the actual tool itself. And I find that with a fine liner, I have to write like all caps. And so I write a lot slower, and it's a lot more legible after the fact. So I use the tool that's best suited for that purpose. But if I do long form journaling, which I also do, I will use a pen that I can write a lot faster with.
Mm-hmm. What's your favorite thing? Do you have, besides your umbrella, obviously?
That's my least favorite thing because I don't own one anymore. Yeah. I own like 3 that all don't belong to me. What is my favorite thing?
Has to be a thing. Yeah. You can't dodge it and say
no.
People.
I'm not going to dodge the question.
Yeah.
That's hard because I think it depends on the context. Like the simple answer is my notebook because it really adds value to my life. I would say another one is my camera. Where like when I travel, like I love taking pictures. I guess it's a sliding scale depending on the use case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do you deal with criticism?
It depends on the source, and it depends on the intention of the criticism. Like if somebody criticizes my work and their intention is right, then I accept it and I try to see if there's something that's workable there. But I also feel like a lot of criticism comes from a really bad place, one of either fear or sadness or hurt, and then I dismiss it as best I can. And it's hard. It's definitely hard, especially when you're online,
So I used to do one thing to read, listen to, or watch before you go to bed. But lately I've dropped the 2 of them, and it's just read. Because I feel like, as we discussed today, reading is so important. It's something people don't do enough of. And for the sake of simplicity and minimalism, I think, especially with this interview, we should do something more pointed. So one thing that somebody should read, or at least start to read before they go to bed tonight.
Like a specific book or a type of book?
Could be a book, could be a blog post. It could be anything that's that you think would be impactful, but books are certainly good.
Well, I'm the subjective answer is read what you wrote throughout the day. In my mind, that's like the big thing. That's like the evening reflection. Like that's the way for me to kind of unload my mind one more time, that chance. And I kind of just can go to sleep knowing that things are okay or in order or being dealt with. So that would be one thing. And I feel people don't do that. Like a big part of bullet journaling, and I know it sounds like a plug, but a big part is getting rid of things. It's about really editing what it is that you're spending your time and energy pursuing. So there's that. And I think it's really important. At least it's something that's been tremendously helpful to me. And then the other part is I would say something that's fun. Just read something that's fun. Like personally, when I start reading, like I have to do a lot of research for what I do, and I just cannot manage it when I'm tired at the end of the day. And I just like want to get lost in a story and get exposed to ideas that don't necessarily serve a purpose other than experiencing them. And I really like reading books that serve no purpose other than my entertainment when I go to bed.
Like I think we get too much caught up on achievement. And you can read 1,000 books on self-development and improving your life and entrepreneurial ventures, but you at some point you need to stop actually reading these books and put that into action and do the actual work. And then at the same time, you do have to enjoy and find time to do things that are fun. And I think, yeah, you're completely right. That's something that I come in and out of. Sometimes I read like biographical books. Sometimes I'll read Hunger Games or some like popcorn novel that's just fun to read. Just I think that's a great reminder to continue to seek out those things.
Something fun or something beautiful. Like yeah. I love reading things that are beautiful, like either beautifully written or about something. Just you go away for a bit, All
right. So one final question before we wrap up here. How should people connect with you online?
If they're interested in Bullet Journal, you can go to bulletjournal.com. On Instagram, we're at Bullet Journal. do the hashtag Bullet Journal to see what the community does. There's a lot of content out there. I'm at Ryder Carroll on Twitter, and then rydercarroll.com if you want to know more about me.
Cool, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to The Ground Up Show. I'm giving away access to 2 hours worth of extended interviews to anyone who reviews The Ground Up Show on iTunes. These interviews with the producers of Minimalism give a never-before-seen look at how he created the film from nothing. Simply send a screenshot of your review to hello@mattdiavella.com, and I'll send you the private links to watch the interviews. Thanks for watching.